Welcome back to All Things Creepy. I'm your host, Micah James, and this week I am talking about two pretty famous dolls, Annabelle and Robert. Now, I'm not a big fan of covering topics that I've already covered, but the first time I remember mentioning Robert and Annabelle, it was in episode 10, and it was very, very briefly. So I wanted to give you guys kind of like my take on their stories in more depth than just simply acknowledging their existence. So that's what this episode is just a little bit more in depth about the history of Annabelle the Raggedy Ann and Robert the doll. So let's get into it. All right, so we are going to start with Annabelle, and she was famous before the Conjuring series came out thanks to the late Ed and Lorraine Warren. However, that movie series really shot her into the mainstream and is now famous beyond the occult community. That being said, it is arguable that the real life Raggedy Ann Annabelle is scarier than the fictional glass doll, especially when you consider the fact that like a lot of stuff happened in the apartment where Raggedy Ann used to live. So in 1971, a nurse named Donna had received Annabelle as a birthday gift from her mother. Something to note is that this particular Raggedy Ann was purchased secondhand at a hobby store, which could have potentially caused some of the weird stuff that happened in the apartment that, was left over from whoever originally owned this particular Raggedy Ann. And not long after Annabelle began living with Donna and her roommate Angie, weird things started to happen. The doll would be seen sitting up or peering outside a room door after being placed in a completely different room. Stuff like that. The girls had a close friend named Lou, and he became very weary of the doll and it didn't take long for him to suspect that Annabelle was possessed by something evil. However, Donna and Angie took longer to suspect anything was off. The roommates started finding notes written on parchment paper, which they already never really had in the apartment. They were written in crayon a lot of times and in like a child's handwriting, and read things like "help us" or "help Lou." One day when Donna came home, she found Annabelle's hands covered in blood. To the nurse, it appeared that the blood was coming from the doll itself. This event led Donna and Angie to inviting a medium to come into their Hartford, Connecticut home. This medium connected with the spirit living inside the doll and found out something pretty interesting. According to this medium, the building that Donna and Angie lived in was allegedly built on grounds that contained the spirit of a young girl named Annabelle, hence the name of the doll. And like it's kind of like there's different like stories about how Annabelle died, but it seems like it's agreed that she was right around 7 years old when she did pass away. Some say she was shot, some say that she was hit by a car. But like I said, the only thing that seems to be agreed on when it comes to these theories is that she was right around that 7-year-old mark. When Raggedy Ann came into the apartment, the spirit decided to take up residence. The girls felt so much sadness towards this apparent tragic story and decided to treat the doll well and treat it like a child because, like I said, allegedly this was the spirit of a 7-year-old girl. And things did seem to calm down a little bit for them. However, there still seemed to be a big problem, and that was how Lou was treated. Every single time he was over, he was treated horribly by the doll whenever he was there. It was thought that maybe she didn't like this man for at least one potential reason, and possibly even both reasons. She perhaps had it out for him because she didn't like men, or she didn't like him because Lou saw her for what she really was, this evil entity. A different friend of Donna and Angie recommended that they get in contact with the Warrens from Monroe, Connecticut, but they didn't contact the couple immediately. It wasn't until Lou's unsettling experience that they eventually called Ed and Lorraine. One night, Donna wasn't home and Angie and Lou were just kind of hanging out in the apartment. There was movement coming from Donna's room, which shouldn't have been the case because, like I said, she was out. So Lou decided to go check it out. Instead of being on the bed where she was placed by Donna, Annabelle had moved to the chair. Lou went towards the doll to presumably move her back to the bed. He suddenly felt this burning sensation on his chest. He ended up checking it out and he saw that he had these several claw marks, like scratched along his chest. These marks ended up healing incredibly fast and had completely disappeared in a few days. This incident led to the roommates finally reaching out to the Warrens, as well as a priest. The Warrens believed that the spirit inside the doll was actually a demon and tricked the medium, and in turn the two girls, into thinking this spirit was more or less innocent. And the priest seemed to agree and decided to exorcise the home, and the couple took the doll with them to their museum where she lives today. Ed and Lorraine were worried that Annabelle would cause chaos for them as well, so they ended up taking back roads in case of an accident. However, that didn't stop the various car troubles they had on their way back. Their power steering and brakes failed, though not necessarily at the same time, and at some point their car stalled out. To remedy this, Ed sprinkled holy water over Annabelle, and it seemed to work, at least well enough to allow them to get home. But it didn't stop there. When they did get home, they would see her levitating around the house. They did try to call a different priest, but their concerns weren't taken seriously. After all, this is a Raggedy Ann doll, so what damage could it really do? So they took matters into their own hands and locked her in this glass case with a warning that reads, "Do not touch." The priest who performed the apartment exorcism also had car troubles, but this time in the form of a really bad accident. While he did unfortunately sustain horrible injuries, he ultimately survived the crash. But a lot of people think that it was Annabelle trying to exact her revenge, basically for trying to get her out of the house. Technically, this isn't the end of her story. If anyone has been keeping up with the news, you might already know that Annabelle went on tour recently. When she stopped in New Orleans, 10 inmates had escaped from jail and a plantation caught fire, and her handler on the tour tragically passed away at a very young age. Though, I do have to acknowledge that it's likely that the Raggedy Ann had nothing to do with the escapees, fire, or death, but it is hard to deny the coincidences, especially given the fact that she was away from home. So who knows if these things would have happened, whether she went on tour or not. To top it off, comedian Matt Rife recently became the owner of the Warrens home and museum and will be for at least 5 years. This actually happened. So I'm recording this episode August 14th. So like earlier this month, actually, August 2025, he became the legal owner, protector, whatever you want to call it, over everything in this museum. So who knows what other things might happen in that time. And if there's anything notable that does happen with Matt being the owner, I will definitely give you guys updates. So now we're going to talk about Robert the doll. While Annabelle's story could potentially be a lot of legend, Robert seems to have an official and unofficial start. So we're going to start with the legendary side of it. It all started in the early 1900s when Robert Eugene Jean Otto was given a doll as a gift from one of the Otto's servants. The servant was allegedly well versed in black magic and or voodoo and had gifted this doll to curse the young boy for the wrongdoings that the servant felt like she faced. Other legends state that she was fired for stealing or being caught doing black magic and wanted to take a revenge. But whatever legend you look into, it seems to be agreed that strange things started to happen after it was given to Robert the human. And it started with Robert, again the human, giving the doll his name, which might not seem that unusual. However, the boy had insisted that Robert was the doll's name and to refer to himself as Eugene or Gene, his middle name. All right, so from here on out, I'm going to be calling Robert the human Gene, his middle name, and Robert is the doll from here on out. Eventually, Gene started talking to Robert. Again, when you're looking at this by itself, it doesn't seem too strange, as a lot of kids have imaginary friends and talk to themselves all the time, and sometimes they'll make different voices for people who are talking back to them. But his mother could hear a voice talk back that seemed way too deep for a young Gene to be using. Gene also began to notice Robert moving around and wreaking havoc. At night, he would see the doll at the edge of the bed just staring at the boy. Whenever there was a mess, Gene would say, "Robert did it." The whole family would hear the doll moving upstairs. The parents would hear the doll talking and reported that they saw its facial expressions change. Neighbors would even say that they could see the doll moving through the window. Of course, any family would want to get rid of such a doll, so they locked Robert up in the attic, and Gene seemed to go back to normal despite still going by his middle name. Years would go by and Gene would get married and move back into his family home. He found Robert the doll again and almost immediately became attached to the doll again, and yet again strange things started to happen. And the house was actually owned by one or two people before the current owners bought it. And one of the owners, I don't remember where I heard this, it might have been And That's Why We Drink, but I think she was approached for a documentary or something like that, and Robert was still in the house when this woman owned the house, and she claimed that Robert tried to kill her, but she won't say any more than that, or I don't know if she's still alive or not, but she would refuse to say any more than that because she was afraid that just talking about that would invite that energy back to her. So as far as the kind of legendy part of it, we have at bare minimum 4 people, claiming that Robert is moving and is doing stuff on his own. But when it comes to the official story, we have some more people kind of confirming that Robert is doing some weird things. So as far as the more official story goes, it is definitely a lot more tame. The doll was reportedly manufactured by a German company called Steiff Company. Gene's grandfather had bought the doll on a trip in 1904 and brought it back with him to give to the boy. Robert the doll remained in the Otto home until 1994 when it was sold to the current owners. As of 1994, Robert lives in the East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida, in a glass box. Though he's confined to this box, he still causes mischief. Employees of the museum say they aren't allowed to close by themselves. Robert is often also seen in different positions in the morning when they open up compared to what position he was in last night. He fell off his chair, or maybe he's sitting in his chair differently, that kind of thing. People, not only employees, but just people who go to the museum, have reported seeing the doll move and change expressions. It's also said that you have to politely ask to take a picture with him, or else bad things will happen. And those who didn't ask him nicely or even ask him at all, it is said that visitors will write to Robert and occasionally adding some candy in a letter asking for forgiveness because they didn't, they didn't ask to take the photo, or otherwise were just not so polite. So yeah, those are the stories of Annabelle and Robert. As far as Annabelle goes, there might be a little bit more that I am missing, but I definitely recommend the Kryptonaut podcast 2-part episodes on Annabelle. I think it's episode like 13 and 14 or 14 and 15, something like that. But I definitely recommend their episodes on Annabelle as well, in case you want like something like probably like a little bit more in depth. And then I mentioned And That's Why We Drink. They covered Robert the Doll as well. It's one of their earlier episodes, I believe. I can't remember which one it is though. And next week, I do plan on covering even more haunted dolls, those that might be famous, but not as famous as Robert and Annabelle. Like, I know I said in the beginning of the episode, I don't like to repeat topics, but I might be covering another doll. I haven't finished writing the script yet, but I might be covering a doll that I covered in episode 10. But much like this episode, that episode, I am planning on doing like an in-depth story, or at least as in-depth as I can, for these other dolls. So with that being said, I will see you guys next week with more creepy dolls.